So I ended up reading 9 books in the second half of March, so stick around to hear what they are. Well, hey friends, my name is Roger and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. And today I'm doing my March month end wrap-up, in which I talk about all the books that I read during the second half of March. I ended up reading 14 books total this month, and but today I'm only going to be discussing the last 9. So the first book I read was entitled The Music of What Happens by Bill Konigsberg. So I was really excited when I heard Bill Konigsberg had a new novel coming out because I read and enjoyed his other work. So this one follows 2 boys, Max and Jordan, who meet one day at Jordan and his mom's rickety food truck right when his mother is in the midst of a huge meltdown. So she ends up offering Max a job, and given that he loves to cook, he agreed. So this is pretty much of an opposites attract kind of novel, with Max being a cool, super cool, easygoing Mexican athlete, and Jordan, who is a skinny, high-strung, angst-filled, overdramatic poet. So through trial and error, research and strategizing, the 2 boys end up making the food truck business a success. And of course they begin to grow closer the more time they spend together. But they are both dealing with their own traumas and misfortunes, with Max harboring a horrible secret that's affecting any potential relationship with Jordan. And Jordan pretty much having to play the parent with his mother, who has never truly recovered from the death of her husband, and now she's caught in this destructive behavior pattern which could unravel everything. So rather than just a book about a sweet romance, though there was that element to it, this book was also about secrets, about toxic masculinity, about toxic parent-child relationships, and sexual consent. So all in all, I thought that The Music of What Happens is a wonderfully well-told story that examines tough and important topics with sensitivity and grace, and with a super sweet romance and playful banter between our 2 main characters at the heart of it all. So the next book that I read during the second half of March was actually an ebook advanced reader copy, and it was entitled Perfect Girlfriend by Karen Hamilton. So this one is a twisted psychological thriller about over-the-top obsession taken to extremes. So it follows our main character Juliet, who is determined to get her ex-boyfriend Nate back no matter what. So she embarks on this wild and far-out plan to get him back, and there's no such thing as going too far to get what she wants. In fact, she ends up completely reinventing herself, and in the process trains to become a flight attendant, unbeknownst to Nate, who is an airline pilot. She does this, of course, so she can be privy to his flight schedule and keep tabs on him. Actually, she ends up infiltrating herself into pretty much every aspect of Nate's life without him being aware of it. So the novel is told entirely from Juliet's point of view, so basically we're in the head of someone who's pretty much psychotic. Now, I have to say it was a bit disturbing being in her head and being privy to her every chilling thought and plan. It was riveting, but at the same time mortifying to see just how far she would go. And it's about this time that we get the delightful, clever twist that I didn't really see coming at all. Now, this wasn't one of those twisty, turny novels with one surprise after another, but rather it was more of an in-depth, mesmerizing personality study of someone who is utterly bonkers. So this book was kind of like Fatal Attraction on steroids, but what I found strangely disconcerting was that I almost found myself rooting for Juliet, which is a tad shocking once you realize that you're cheering on a crazy pants psycho stalker. So the author wrote the story in such a way that you couldn't help sympathize with her, even though you know what she's doing is so wrong, which, in my humble opinion, really highlights the author's skills as a writer. So The Perfect Girlfriend, it's about mind games, devious manipulation, obsession, revenge, and fixation in which an unhinged and relentless young woman sets out to remind her ex that she is indeed the perfect girlfriend. So this was an excellent standout novel that I heartily recommend, though I will warn you that the ending is a tad vague. Still, I love the book and will definitely read more by this author. So in the spirit of disclosure, I did receive an advanced reader copy of this from NetGalley in exchange for an honest review, and as always, all opinions are solely my own. So the next book I read in March was entitled Every Heart a Doorway by Hyttinen McGuire. So this is an urban fantasy that follows Nancy, who is brought to a new boarding school. So Nancy is one of those children who disappear and then reappear months or even years later, often with fantastical tales of adventures in magical lands. So think of Alice in Wonderland or the Children of Narnia, children stumbling upon doorways leading to other worlds. But of course, nobody believes the kids and instead assume that they've gone through some sort of dramatic event and are using the stories and magical worlds as some sort of coping mechanism. So the children to whom this happens often have a difficult time adjusting when they tumble back into our world. There are feelings of anger, of loss, of unfairness at being thrust into a world, a place where they no longer wish to be, meaning our world. So, whoops, I kicked the camera. Okay, so where was I? So I was saying that the despairing parents end up dropping their children off at the Eleanor West Home for Wayward Children in the hopes that the school will be able to return their child to the way he or she was before and stop their delusions. But unbeknownst to the parents, Eleanor West has first-hand experience in slipping into magical worlds. So the book was quite enthralling once we learned about the different types of worlds that the children in the school have spent time in. And if all that's not strange enough, the author ups the ante when murders begin occurring on campus. So in addition to having a magical boarding school, there's a mystery to solve and a murder on the loose. So what's not to love? So this is really a novella coming in at, I think, this one comes in at 173 pages, but it's utterly haunting, captivating, and definitely whimsical. But truth be told, this could have been a little longer, as character development and the world building could have used maybe a little more depth. But still, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've already picked up the next two books in the series. And this is actually one of the books for the SFF the Booktube Science Fiction and Fantasy Awards. Actually, it's the third book in the series that's up for the award, but I had to read the first two to catch up. So the next book that I read is entitled Slayer by Kirsten White. So there's no way that I could pass this one up, as I am a huge, and I mean huge, fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I watched every episode faithfully for 7 years? And I've actually rewatched the entire series at some point, and I might do so again. So this spin-off is set in that same Buffy world. I think it takes place 2 months after the last episode of the show, to be exact. So this follows two twin sisters, Nina and Artemis, who both have grown up at the Watchers Academy, where teens are trained as watchers or guides for slayers. Now, if you're not familiar with Buffyverse, slayers are girls gifted with supernatural strength in order to fight the forces of darkness, such as vampires and demons. Now, Nina is not herself training to be a watcher, but rather she's training to be a healer, as she has never been one for the violent watcher lifestyle. But of course, things don't go the way she plans. And one day, following the appearance of a hellhound at her door, Nina learns that she is not only a slayer, but also the last slayer that there will ever be. She's the end of the slayer line. So as Nina begins her training with a young watcher, she encounters a demon named Doug who feeds on happiness. There is a fighting ring with monsters, and eventually bodies begin to turn up and chaos ensues. So Nina has to figure out who or what is killing people and stop them before someone she loves is next. Of course, she doesn't know the full extent of the murderer's evil plan. So I really love the refreshing premise of this book with its focus on watchers rather than slayers. I also love all the references from the show and the Easter eggs that a diehard Buffy fan would notice. So supposedly a lot of what happens in the book is a continuation of the Buffy comic, which I have not read. So I won't spoil anything for those of you who plan on reading them before picking up the book, but I do remember thinking to myself, well, I don't remember that from this series. So the lore of this book comes from both the show and the comic. So I really enjoyed this a lot, and like the original show, it had themes of choice, duty, belonging, and of course complicated parental relationships. And of course there's the conflicted yet badass female protagonist. So the book had great characters, an excellent plot, and I was overjoyed that even though this is the first book in the series, it did not end on a cliffhanger, so I thank Ms. White for that. So all in all, a great start to a new series, and I'll definitely be continuing on with it. In fact, I can't wait for the next book. Okay, so the next book that I read this month is entitled My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyenkin Braithwaite. Okay, so when I saw the title and the cover for this, I was hooked. And I was pretty certain that this would be quite the kooky and dark, twisted little story, and I was right. So the story is set in Nigeria, the author's birthplace, and follows two sisters, Korede and Ayula. So it turns out Ayula has a bad habit of killing her boyfriends and then calling in Korede to come to her aid and help clean up the mess, though it's mostly Korede who does the cleaning, given that she's a nurse and knows how to get blood out of carpeting. So Ayula always claims self-defense, though strangely enough she never has a mark on her and never shows remorse at what she's done. One instance especially comes to mind when Korede asks her how her getaway was, and Ayula says, "Oh, it was fine, except he died." I mean, really. So things get kind of tense between the two sisters when Ayula shows up at the hospital where Korede works, and Tade, a doctor at the hospital, and the man that Korede is secretly in love with, is immediately smitten by Ayula. Oh, I also need to mention at this point that Ayula is incredibly beautiful and eye-catching. So not only is Korede heartbroken that the man she loves is now lovesick over her sister, but there's also that little issue of her sister killing every one of her boyfriends, meaning that Tade's life is now in jeopardy. Someone she cares about is now in danger. So both the sisters in this story are extremely flawed. On one hand, you have Korede, extremely resentful and jealous of her sister, but regardless, always comes to her rescue. And then there's Ayula, who's totally self-absorbed, Instagram obsessed, and knows that men flock to her beauty, yet doesn't seem concerned by the stress and the precarious position in which she puts her sister, accessory to murder. So basically, both characters, though extremely multi-layered, are mostly unlikable, though strangely enough, you end up empathizing with them during the story. I found it interesting how the book took us to the girl's childhood as well, where we could understand kind of how Ayula developed her homicidal tendencies, as it were. So yeah, I really ended up enjoying this fast little read. I think I read it in about a couple of hours. And I especially appreciated the social commentary about society's obsession with beauty, the objectification and role of women in a patriarchal society, with a touch of sibling rivalry thrown in. I do believe that this book is also longlisted for the 2019 Women's Prize for Fiction. But all in all, yeah, I love the book, and a unique and enjoyable read. So the next book that I read thus far in March is entitled Witchmark by C.L. Polk. So this is the first book in the Kingston Cycles series, and is actually longlisted for the Lambda Literary Awards, or also known as the Lammies, this year, and is also a Nebula finalist. So Witchmark is an alternative historical fantasy novel that follows Miles Singer, a powerful secondary mage or witch who is in hiding. So because of his magic, he basically has two life choices: be enslaved by his family's interests, or be committed to a witch's asylum. Both of it, neither of which sound very attractive. So being enslaved means becoming a battery to his sister's magic, in which you're magically bound to a mage's will and pretty much have no will of your own. And this is definitely something that Miles does not want. So he escaped. He went to war, faked his own death, and because of his natural healing abilities, or magical healing abilities, he ended up becoming a doctor working with veterans who suffer from PTSD. But this all changes one day for Miles when a fatally poisoned patient shows up at the hospital, exposing Miles' healing gift and the witchmark to a stranger who happened to be in the corner of the room while Miles tended to the patient. So now Miles has to come out of the shadows and put his anonymity and freedom at risk to investigate the patient's murder. So, to find the truth, he's going to have to rely on the family he mistrusts and despises, and on the kindness of an extremely handsome and otherworldly stranger who popped into his life. So the more he digs, the closer he gets to uncovering a terrifying dark conspiracy which could destroy the entire society. So this is kind of a steampunk slash historical fiction slash fantasy slash murder mystery slash paranormal romance with excellent world building and a unique magic system. Though it's not quite our world, it's close enough to be recognizable and relatable. There are also several interesting themes and tropes going on in this book. There's the oppression and exploitation of the less privileged. There's slavery, the cost of technological progress, cost of prosperity, PTSD, consent, and more. The story is actually quite different from anything I've recently read, and I ended up enjoying this historical urban fantasy and probably would give it about 3.5 stars. Now this is also supposedly the first book in the series, and I definitely plan on continuing on with it. So the next book that I read this month is entitled This Is Kind of an Epic Love Story by Karen Colander. So this is described as a romantic comedy and follows 16-year-old Nathan Bird. Though he's an aspiring screenwriter, Nathan is also a cynic and does not believe in happy endings, given that he's seen the death of way too many relationships in his life to believe in Hollywood endings. In fact, it was only just recently when his best friend turned girlfriend, Florence, cheated on him and subsequently broke up with him. Thus, Nathan plays it safe and keeps his heart firmly locked away. But when he bumps into his former friend and neighbor, Oliver James Hernandez, who had moved away 5 years prior, Nate's emotions are thrust into a turmoil. The relationship ended poorly at that time, with Nate harboring romantic feelings for Oliver. And now Nate realizes that those feelings never quite entirely went away. So now he has a chance to tell Ollie how he really feels. But the question is he willing to open himself up to a heartbreak? So this ended up being quite a sweet little romance between two boys, though it wasn't quite the epic love story that the title promises. There was a lot of miscommunication, arguing and sulking between the two main characters, with a good dose of high angst thrown in, that I sometimes found a little bit frustrating, if not exhausting. But epic, I wouldn't go quite so far as that. So sweet, definitely, but there was no big, major, serious conflict that would render it epic. What I did like, however, was the amount of diversity in this story. Both of the characters were persons of color, and Oliver is actually hearing impaired. I also appreciated how Nate learned American Sign Language as a child so he could communicate with Oliver. And there's actually quite a bit of descriptive signing in this story. But what really stood out for me in this story was how the characters were so open with their sexuality. There were no huge dramatic coming out scenes, heavy angst or self-loathing. Nobody had to justify their sexuality to anyone else or even label themselves for that matter. You know, I don't think the words gay or bisexual were used even once throughout this book, which I found delightfully refreshing. Being queer was never the cause of anyone's discomfort, emotional pain, denial, dilemma, or anxiety in this story. The characters simply loved who they loved and dated who they were attracted to, no justifications necessary. So all in all, this is a cute, fun, queer, will they, won't they romance with flawed yet lovable main characters who both seek to discover their own happy ending. And I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. So the next book that I read this month was actually a non-fiction book entitled Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. It's kind of glary, another library book. So Cal Newport is the author of Deep Work, a book that I also really enjoyed and that really resonated with me. So in this book, the author talks about how to live a focused life in an increasingly noisy, tech-saturated world that is constantly vying for our attention. So in the book, he examines our relationship with our phones, with social media, with never-ending news headlines, with screens. And the book looks at how we can untether ourselves a bit from tech that's pretty much taken over and invaded our lives. He basically shows us how to reduce these distractions from our personal life by taking part in meaningful, high-quality analog activities. So, some of his advice includes spending time alone in nature or in solitude with our own ideas and not other people's, stopping social media corporations from hijacking our attention, taking long walks, journaling, limiting social media usage, reclaiming leisure, getting rid of notifications, leaving your phone at home, what else? Focusing on in-person conversations. There's consolidating email and texting activities by batching them. An idea which I really liked, and so much more. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail lest I take away the enjoyment of discovering these ideas, discussions for yourself. But I will say that this is an inspiring and potentially transformative book, and I'm really glad I read it. Now, I mentioned I got this from the library, but I just might end up purchasing this. I wouldn't mind a copy on my bookshelves that I can refer back to. So last but not least this month was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. And I actually consumed this book on Audible. And let me tell you, the narration was phenomenal. It was narrated by, I think his name is Steve West. I should have looked that up before I did this video, but I do believe his name is Steve West, and he was just amazing. And I was pleased to see that he is also narrating the sequel. So I can't believe that I finally got around to reading this book. And the main reason is because The Muse of Nightmare is the sequel to Strange the Dreamer, is one of the finalists for the BookTube's SFF Awards, so it turned out to be an excellent reason for me to finally get to Strange the Dreamer. So the story follows a librarian named Laszlo Strange, who's been obsessed his entire life with the mythic lost city of Weep, a city that everyone else has strangely forgotten. So then he gets confirmation that Weep not only exists, but also needs help, leading to an amazing opportunity for Laszlo to visit the once lost city. So Laszlo ends up joining one of Weep's citizens known as the God Slayer and his band of warriors on the journey to the lost city. Now, the strange thing is that the God Slayer doesn't tell the new recruits any details of their supposed mission, only that they are coming to Weep to help. So the question is, what happened in Weep 200 years ago to cut it off from the rest of the world? And exactly what did the God Slayer slay that went by the name of a god? And what is this mysterious problem that he now seeks help in solving? So I went into this book blind, knowing practically nothing about the story, and I am so glad I did. So I am not going to mention anything else about this plot, lest I spoil the story for those of you who haven't yet read it. My experience has been that the less you know about the story going in, the better. I will say, however, that it's absolutely phenomenal, with an addicting plot that just blew my mind, and rich, beautiful lyrical prose. I really love the language in this book, and the story itself is magical, it's moving, enthralling, with an amazing attention to detail that really created a truly atmospheric read. There's so much going on here. There's libraries, books, monsters, gods and goddesses, mythical armies, there's ghosts, there's carnage, hate, fear, despair, and even love. So the characters were so well fleshed out and real that they nearly jumped off the page for me. And I thought that this ended up being a truly epic fantasy tale. And I love this so much that I'm going right into the next book of the series, which is the Muse of Nightmares, because I really cannot get enough of this world. So needless to say, I gave this book 5 stars. So that is it for my March, forgot what month I was in. Yes, March month end wrap-up. So what did you read this month? Let me know in the comments. And as always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. And if you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you click the like button below and subscribe if you haven't, and click the notification icon to get notified whenever I release new videos. And that about does it. I will talk to you in the next video. Roger and out.